I was talking about passwords and the minimum length that is actually required in most of the cases is 5 or 8. Okay. But as you move forward, people will tell you, cybersecurity experts will tell you that you should keep at least 16 to 17 digits of password. Okay. So these should be the minimum characters. Now you must be thinking it is very hard. It is very hard for someone to remember his password, which is around 16 to 17 characters. Okay. The only reason is that because these days we have so many tools, right? We have so many tools that can help us in cracking these passwords. That is why if you have a password which is at least 16 to 17 characters of length, it will take the attacker way too much time. Okay, which means it's practically impossible. It's practically impossible. It takes years, okay, to crack such a password. So now there are different users. They can keep passwords which could be 8 characters in length. There could be users who could keep their passwords 12 characters in length. So obviously this is not the right approach of saving your password in a password database. Okay, so what happens first is that your password that you create. Okay, this is the first time. This is step one where you are adding a password to your machine. Okay, so step one is password creation. You as a user create a password, then your password is what? Your password is encrypted. After your password is encrypted, then it is hashed. Why is it encrypted? So that anyone, if they get access to the database, they shouldn't be able to see your password right away. Okay. Then it is hashed. What are the reasons for hashing? Adds another layer of security and provides uniformity. Okay. This is what happens. So when your password is created, it is encrypted and then hashed, and then the hashed value is stored inside the database. Okay. Now multiple users can log in and the same steps will be followed. Okay, they'll create their password, it will be encrypted, it will be hashed, and then it will be put inside the database. So this was the step where a user creates the password. Now, what do you think, guys? Like every time you log in, same process happens, or what actually happens when you log in the next time? What will happen? Will the same process repeat and then inside the database it will be checked, or what do you think will happen? Like this was the time when you created your password. Now you have your computer and now you are logging in for the 10th or 11th time. So how does password, comparison take place? How do they authenticate you? How does your computer authenticate you? Any idea? Come on. So like I said, give me your opinions. You don't have to be right or wrong. Nobody's ever right or wrong. You tell me about your opinions. What do you think happens, guys? Yes, come on. Any idea? I'm asking all of you. What will happen? Nope. Okay, I give you 1 more minute to think about it.
Sir, I have doubt, sir.
Yeah, sure, sure, sure. Tell me.
Sir, is it possible to hack a hashed password, sir?
Yeah, it is. So I'm about to show you that we have different brute forcing tools which actually work on hashes. It is possible to, crack hashed passwords, but then even hashes are based on algorithms. Okay. So the weaker the hash algorithm, easier to crack that hashed password. Stronger the algorithm, it will take too much time. Okay, and in some
Okay.
cases it is practically impossible to crack those hashes, because these days we have algorithms which are, hybrid. Okay, so I'll show you how to figure out the algorithm. I'll take you back to etc shadow. Okay, so what do you think happens in this case? Like the next time you log in into your computer, how does your computer know that this is the right user? What kind of comparison takes place in that case? Any idea, guys? Or if you have any questions, ask me so that I can answer your doubts and you can tell me. Okay.
I think it helps to cookie, sir.
Okay. See, cookies are for HTTP and HTTPS. Okay, so cookies are going to store your session details for, HTTPS. In this case, in your own computer, yes, you can say that there is a mechanism similar to cookies, but not exactly. I'll tell you what will happen here. Okay. Now, your password was created. Okay. And what was finally saved in the database? Password hash. Okay. What was saved in the database? Password hash. Now, every time you log in, every time you get this login screen, you enter your username, you enter your password. What will happen? Because your device has compute power. That is why your device is known as a computer. Now, compute power means that your device has CPU, your device has RAM. Okay. Now, when you turn on your computer, your compute power starts working. And what will happen? Password will again be encrypted, again be hashed. And then the hash that you enter for a password will be compared with the hash which is now in the database. If these values are equal, which means you are the right user. If not, then it will tell you to enter your password again. Now you must be thinking, guys, why this process happens again and again every time we log in. Why? Because the process of encrypting something and hashing something is very easy and takes minimal time Okay, there could be cases like you must be thinking that why can't we take this password and inside this database we first take this hash, we reverse it, we decrypt it and then compare the original value. This is also possible, but this takes time. So what happens is every time you log in, the same process will happen. Password will be encrypted, password will be hash, and then hash will be compared with the hash present in the database. Which hash is this? This is the hash that you stored when you first created your password. Okay, for the first time. So these hashes are compared, and on basis of that, the computer authenticates you. Okay, the computer authenticates you because
Hello.
yeah, tell.
Actually, I have one doubt here. So,
Sure.
so yeah, first time we are logging into the our account. Okay, I am talking about the offline. So, once we are logging into the offline account, so the database, like whichever password you are inputting, so this password would be encrypted and hashed, right? And also
Yeah,
the hash value stored in the database. Okay.
right.
Later time, I have logged in the same account with help of my username and password. Okay. So in the
Okay.
time the I have entered in the same password. Okay, but how the encrypted hash value is communicated with the database if I
Okay.
was in offline.
See, it doesn't even matter if you're offline, because see, this is your computer, you're not connecting to a service. Okay, your computer has background processes and daemons running, right? Background processes and daemons running, which help you authenticate. Okay, and these processes will communicate to a database which is local. Okay, this SAM, we don't actually call it, the technical name is not a database, we actually call it SAM module, security access module, or security access manager. So there is a local file, there is a local database present inside it. Okay, there is a local database present inside it. So like, see, I'll illustrate the whole process for you. So first time you buy your computer, you create something, you create a password. Okay, it will tell you that you can do this. So you create a password. So let's say you create a password called ABC 12345. Now what will happen? A background process will run and it will encrypt it. Now there are multiple encryption algorithms. You know, a good encryption algorithm will be taken here, and then whatever the result is, it will be hashed. Okay. Encryption is okay because it helps us protect our data from the attackers. But why hash? Hash is going to help us make this variable input uniform. Okay. Why? Because just like you, if your computer is a multi-user operating system, then just like you, another user will log in. Okay. And their password could be EF1234 GYRQ. Okay, let's look at the size here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, how much is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now this one is 5 characters in length. This one is 8 characters in length. Okay, when we encrypt it, the resulting answer is going to be bigger in size. Okay, the resulting answer is going to be bigger in size. So to maintain uniformity and to create another layer of security, it will be hashed. So now this hash and this hash will be of the same length. I'm not saying that they will be equal. I'm just saying that they will be of the same length. Makes sense to you? Do you understand this?
Understood. And
Okay.
also here, like whichever data we are encrypting, we can get the data back to decryption, right? So in the hash, we can't decrypt the data, right?
Yeah, see, the thing is that with hash, you can actually dehash it. That's possible. But it takes so much time. It's practically called brute forcing. Okay. Reversing a hash is difficult. Okay. Reversing a hash is difficult. Why? Because it is made to be in such an order so that if an attacker is trying to reverse the hash, they will face a very hard time brute forcing it. So this is basically a mathematical function which says that if you have a hash function, okay, if you have a hash function and you give it any arbitrary input or arbitrary size input, whether it's 5, whether it's 10, whether it's 20, whether it's 30, could be anything. The resulting hash will have fixed length. Okay. So when you have this hash, reversing it is going to be very, very hard. That is why when the next time you log in, okay, when the next time you log in and you enter your password, you might think that in your database where this hash is stored, it should be dehashed and then it should be decrypted, and whatever the value is, it should be compared with your password. No, it is possible, but it is very time consuming. Okay, for this, you know, when you log in, it would then ideally take around 5 to 6 minutes for you to enter your computer, but that's not the right thing, right? And because that isn't called ease of access. So for ease of access, what is going to happen? The password that you enter, whether it's right or whether it's wrong, it will be encrypted, it will be hashed, and then it will be compared with the hash in the database, because encryption and hashing do not take that much time. These processes take minimal processing power, but their reverse, taking their reverse takes a lot of time. Okay. So this is what happens every time you try to log in. Now, if you change the password value to password 1 or password 2 or password 3, again, encryption will take place, hash will take place. But we know that this time this hash will be different from the hash stored in the database. So since they are not equal, you'll get an error message that please log in again or incorrect set of credentials. Okay. Is it clear?
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Sir, how a unknown database knows our email password, sir.
What? I couldn't understand you.
Sir, if you are going to log in a website, and
Yeah.
we have to log in with our email and password, how a unknown database know our password is right or wrong?
Yeah, again, so because in that database, see, so suppose you are dealing with a website, right? So this is going to be the website. Okay, now I would actually divide this website into two portions. One that interacts with the user and the other one that interacts with the server side technologies, among which there will be a database. So database will be there. Okay. So this is going to be a database, could be any database, could be MySQL, could be PostgreSQL, could be Firebase by Google. Okay. It's up to the developer what they are making use of. Okay. So this portion is known as backend. This portion is known as front end. Now a user interacts with front end portion. Okay. A user interacts with the front end portion. So this is the user sitting on their computer. This is through which they can access the front end portion. Now front end portion is what you see on the website. Okay. So the first thing that will happen is they will create an account, right? They will create an account. So account will be created. When this account is created, this is communicated to the backend using a server side language, could be PHP, could be you can also use Python for that for backend. You can also use Node.js. Okay. When this happens, this is communicated to the database. Okay, so a new entry is created in the database with an email and a password. Okay, now again, it is completely up to the database how they want to store this information. Do they want to keep the email as it is, or do they want to hash it as well? Okay, do they want to take a hash of it as well? So they could create key value pairs, like for every key could be your email ID, the value would be your password. Now password should be in encrypted and hashed format. Okay guys, so the next time you log in, okay, this is the time when you create your password on a particular website, like suppose Facebook or Instagram or Microsoft Teams, or it could be anything. The next time you log in, what will happen? You enter a password. This will be communicated from the front end to back end and then to the database. Value will be checked. Where are you? So if it matches, it means that you have logged in and you will be directed to your dashboard. Got it? Is
Sir,
that clear?
sir, our email password is created from Google, and we are going to log in Facebook. So there is no need to create it in Facebook, sir.
Yeah, so there is something that works which is known as OAuth. Okay, OAuth is basically the technology with which listen to me, with which you can actually log into different services. Like you can log in using Google on Facebook, you can log in using Google on a new website, you can log in using Google on your banking ID. So what happens is OAuth. Okay, now in OAuth, what happens is that whatever email or password is being used for logging in, now this will be the primary provider through which they will maintain your security. So suppose if you go and if you try to log in with Google, then you will see that if you try to check your Google settings, there you will have the subscriptions or the websites that are logged in using your OAuth credentials. Okay. Now, whenever inside that website where you have logged in, they will have a separate database which will contain OAuth entries, which means that you did not create an account right away. You came through a different set of credentials which were provided by some other party like Google, okay, or LinkedIn or Apple ID. So that is how it works. Okay. This portion is there inside our bug bounty, bug bounty module of the course, because this is a vulnerability that is exploited in order to, tell the platforms that we found a bug. Okay, so there is a bug called OAuth misconfiguration where we can exploit this vulnerability. So some websites do not keep OAuth in a proper manner. Some websites have misconfigured OAuth. Okay, OAuth means that you are logging into a new website using some other set of credentials or some other service where you have your account, like from Google or Apple ID. Okay, so this is something that we will deal with. Don't worry. Okay.
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 So encrypted and hashed. Now coming back to Kali Linux. Now guys, you must be thinking that the directories that I am telling you about only apply to Kali Linux. So first of all, take that out of your mind. Whatever I'm telling you about the file system applies to every Linux, whether it's Ubuntu, whether it's Kali Linux, whether it's Parrot Security, whether it's Remnux. So there are different types of Linux. Okay, Linux distributions. We have already talked about Linux distributions in our very first class. Now, a distribution just means that you are using it for a specific purpose. The operating system still stays Linux. Okay. Now I'm going to come back here. I'm going to write ls. Okay. ls is going to tell me the contents of the directory which I'm in. If I want to check it, pwd, I'm in /home/Kali. I will first go to slash directory. So I will just write cd space slash. Then what do I want to do? I want to go ahead and I want to write cd space slash etc. Okay, when I do this, I am in the etc directory. In etc directory, I am going to open up this file called shadow. Okay, so I will write cat shadow and I will get this error. We have already discussed this yesterday. Now what we will do is we will take the permissions from the root user by writing sudo cat shadow. I will have to enter my password. Why? I will enter my password so that the root user knows that a user named Kali logged in at this particular time. Now don't worry about the settings here. This is my Kali clock. So for this clock at 11 p.m. somebody logged in and tried to access this file, which is the shadow file. Okay. And now this is the user Kali and this is my passwords hash. This is my passwords hash. Okay. Now, how do you identify what is happening here? Okay, it's simple. Now you can never find out what is this with the naked eye. You will obviously have to use a tool to find the password out or crack the hash, but you can at least get an idea what kind of hash it is. So you guys asked me like, is it possible to reverse the hashes? Yes, it is. But the time taken to reverse a hash depends on the algorithm that we are using. So the algorithm being used here, guys, is $y$. Okay. Now, whatever comes inside these $2 is the type of hash we are using. Okay. So we have got different types of hashes. $1, $2, $3, $4, $5, $6, and $y$. Now, what do these values mean? Okay, first of all, whenever you look at a hash, you just have to find out this pattern: dollar, then a number, and then dollar. It means that it is the type of the hash. So it goes in the ascending order. Okay, smaller the number, weaker the hash. Smaller the number, weaker the hash. Okay, this $y$ is basically a hybrid algorithm, which is way too strong. Okay, now I have this hash open in front of you. Okay, ideally I shouldn't do this because I don't know if you guys can, take a screenshot and crack it, but you can try your luck. You can try your luck. Yes, you will be able to find out this hash value, but it will take a lot of time for you guys to decrypt this hash. Okay, why? Because the algorithm being used here is $y$. Now, what do these algorithms mean? How do they work? That is going to be discussed in the crypto section. But for now, you should be knowing what a hash is. So if I ask you what a hash is, you should be able to give me a simple answer that it's a mathematical function that takes in a password or any, string of any arbitrary length, and we are able to get an output of fixed length. Okay. Now, why do we keep hashes? number one, to ensure uniformity in the file that we are storing. Okay, to maintain uniformity, to maintain standardization. And the other one is that it adds an extra layer of security, because if you have just a password which is encrypted, it is easier for the attacker to decrypt the password. But if you add a hash, then it will double or triple the amount of time taken by the attacker to reverse that hash. Okay, how do you take a hash? Very simple, very simple. We looked at that yesterday as well. So take care of these two websites. The number one is Crypty. Okay, this first website is going to be Crypty. Now here I'm going to choose a cipher called Caesar cipher. Now what is this Caesar cipher? This Caesar cipher was actually introduced in 17th century, way before we were born. Okay, so when we talk about cyber security, guys, cyber security involves a lot of domains. Okay, but the parent domain of cyber security, which is responsible for everything that we have right now, is cryptography. Okay, cryptography dates back to 1970s. 1970s. Okay, but even before we had cryptography in 1970, we used to have something known as Caesar cipher in 17th century. Okay, so you guys must have gone through your English literature in class 8th or class 9th, where we had a story of a person named Julius Caesar. Okay, so that Julius Caesar was a person from Rome. Okay, so when there was a war going on between the Romans and some other people, what used to happen? They used to exchange messages. They used to exchange messages. So now the problem of sending messages that you never know who is a spy. So they can easily understand your message. So how, if they had to send a message like, hey, the meeting is at 7 p.m. They put this sentence on a piece of paper, and if they're giving other people this piece of paper to pass it to the eventual receiver, if someone is a spy, they will easily be able to understand this message. So at that time, they used a very simple technique, that what they will do, I write, hey, the I wrote this message, hey, the meeting is at 7 p.m. So what they're doing, it's very simple. They are taking A, they are replacing it with D. They are taking B, they are replacing it with E. They are taking C, they are replacing it with F. So if A is 0, B is 1, C is 2, and D is 3, they are just shifting the characters by 3. It's that simple. Now, right now, if I give you guys such an example, then you'll be able to decrypt it by yourself automatically or by using a computer. But that was 17th century, guys. So in 17th century, obviously, no one would make sense out of it. Okay, so this is encryption. This is encryption. This is the most basic form of encryption that we have. It is still used somewhere in a lot of parts of the world, because not a lot of people know what cryptography is. Okay, now when you receive this message, suppose I send this message to Dishant, and now Dishant has to make sense out of this message. Now he gets this message and looks at it like, what the hell did Adhirath write to me? Now he'll take this message and he'll go to decode. Okay, once he decodes it, what will happen? He'll be able to understand the whole message. When I had to send this message, I added 3 characters. So A converted to D. When he has to read it, he has to convert it back. D to A, E to B. Okay, so on. Got it, guys? Now what is a hash? This is an arbitrary input. Okay, I'll write MD5. So MD5 is basically a type of hash. It's the world's oldest hash. That is why right now it can be easily cracked. So if I go to a website, now you don't even have to do this mathematically, guys. There are websites that will do it for you. Okay, so I will paste it, and there you go. You have your hash. Okay, Now, this is something that is stored in the database. Okay, and since it's the oldest form of the hash, it is easily crackable. It is easily crackable. Okay, so this is what happens in etc shadow. Your password hashes are stored. Okay, now hashing is something that is there on all the operating systems, whether you're talking about Mac OS, because even in my Mac OS, there is a file called etc shadow, because Mac is basically built on Unix. It's a type of Unix. I wouldn't say it's exactly Unix. It's built similar to Unix. So Unix and Linux are similar operating systems. So for Mac and Linux, this happens the same. For Windows, you have Security Access Manager. Okay, when we go to Windows hacking, we'll look at that. Okay, now coming to something which is one more file. Now this file name is etc cron tab. So in order to explain it, I will ask you guys some question. Now guys, whenever you have WhatsApp updates on your phone, do they happen automatically or do you have to do something for them?
It's automatically.
Automatically. What about antivirus scans, which are the regular scans or the periodic scans? They are also automatic or do you have to set them up?
Mm, automatic.
Automatic. What about system updates which are coming?
Automatically.
System update scan, right?
It's
So
set it by yes.
yeah. So basically with little to no human intervention, some processes are automatic. Some processes are automatic. What are the example? Update check, WhatsApp backup, antivirus scan. Okay. Now you guys could say that, hey, I actually set it up. I actually set my WhatsApp backup to be every Thursday at 10 p.m. But yes, you do it for once and it will automatically happen on every Thursday. Same for update checks. They will ask you like, do you want to look for updates every Friday? Yes, it will happen every Friday automatically. You just set it up maybe once or twice, and in most of the cases, you don't even have to intervene. You don't even have to interfere here. Okay, so these are going to happen automatically. Now you will see that at most of the times when you are sleeping, it could be possible that your WhatsApp is backing up or your system is checking for updates or a new update is getting downloaded. I'm not saying installed, I'm saying downloaded. Does it happen that your phone tries to wake you up at the middle of the night that, hey guys, I am trying to update myself or I'm trying to back up myself. Could you help me? Has it ever happened? If you're sleeping, your phone never does that to you, right? Your phone will do that automatically. And if your phone has to download a update, it will do it. And in the morning when you wake up, you get a message. The download is finished. Do you want to update your phone? Right. So that is what happens. So these processes are automatic and are basically recurring. Do you agree with me, guys, or no? These are recurring.
Yes.
Okay. Now recurring in the form that they could happen daily. They could happen weekly. They could happen monthly. Or some processes also happen hourly. Okay. So since they are recurring, since they are automatic, since they do not require a human user's presence to get executed, they are actually put into a scheduler. Okay. So there will be a background process on your operating system, which will do what? Which will automate them and make them run in those particular intervals. Now intervals could be like this: hourly, monthly, weekly, and daily. Okay, you could even have yearly or decadely, but yeah, so the main intervals are these. Main intervals are these. Okay, so when these processes have to run, they actually get fed into a scheduler. Okay, so for Windows, that scheduler is known as Windows scheduler or process scheduler. But for Linux, that scheduler name is cron. Okay, cron is the name of that scheduler in Linux. Any kind of Linux, Kali Linux, Parrot, Ubuntu, Cent, anything. Since it's Linux, it's the basic functionalities will be the same or common. So they get fed into a scheduler called cron. Okay. Now, when a system has to perform an antivirus scan, does it need access to sensitive files? What do you think? It does, right? So that nobody has hampered with your C drive or your program files, or nobody has uh, tampered with the file which contains your passwords. What do you think? Yes, it is going to, whenever something automatic is going to happen, it will or it might need access to sensitive files and folders on your system. What do you think?
I guess we need to give an evaluated provider just to the particular user so that the job will run according to that.
Yeah, so most of the jobs are, they might not need access to sensitive files, but there are processes that might need, some access to the sensitive portion of your device. Like if an update needs to happen, then it has to actually, go into the BIOS, go into the UEFI and carry the update from there. Okay, so that is a pretty sensitive portion of your device. Could be if you have an iOS, then it's a sensitive portion because it has to go into the bootloader to perform the update. Okay, or if you have an Android, it has to go into the BIOS to do that update. Okay, so when such kind of automated process require access to sensitive files, well, whenever you need to gain access to sensitive files, even if you are a user or even if you are a process, you should take the super user permissions. Okay. But since these are processes, they will not work like this, that they will first ask it from the regular user and then the regular user will ask it from the root. Because most of these processes happen when we are not even paying attention to our device, when we are either sleeping or when we are away from our device. Okay. So whenever these processes get fed into the cron job, they automatically get root permissions. They automatically get root permissions. Okay. Not at every time. Whenever they have to run in this manner, whenever they have to run in the recurring manner, then suppose if a process runs daily, and then if that process runs daily at 7 p.m., then exactly when the 7 p.m., when the bell strikes 7, this process, when it has to run as a cron job, it will get root permissions. Okay, it will get root permissions. So this, all this process doesn't happen automatically. What you need to do as a Linux administrator, you need to put these processes, you first need to figure out which processes have to run in an automated or a recurring manner. Then you put them into the cron tab. Just give me 1 minute, guys. Yeah. So what I was saying is, as a Linux administrator, you need to configure them, that you need to figure out which processes will go into cron tab and will run as cron jobs. Okay. And when a particular cron job is running, it will have, for that particular moment, it will have root permissions. Now, having said all this, how do you think this particular phase will be helpful to us as an attacker or as an ethical hacker? Think carefully. Did you understand my question, guys? Like I said, that these processes will have regular permissions, but when they have to run as cron jobs or when they have to run in a recurring or an automated manner, for that particular time, when that WhatsApp backup is happening, it will get root permissions. It will get all the permissions. so that it can access sensitive files, it can make modifications to those sensitive files. How does this help us out as an attacker or as an ethical hacker? Come on, think. Give me your opinions. What can we do? If you have an idea, tell me. Then we will translate that idea into reality. Tell me.
Please tell me once.
Okay, my question was that when these processes are running, it's okay. But when these processes are running in that automated manner and in that recurring manner, let's say that WhatsApp backup is going to happen every Friday at 7 p.m. So when the day is Friday and when the time is 7, it will get root permissions unless and until that process is complete. Now I'm saying, how does a cron job getting root permissions help me out as an attacker? Help me out as an attacker. That's my question.
So during that, maybe we get the root access
Directly or indirectly?
indirectly.
Indirectly. Awesome. So what we can do is basically we will first find out that which processes are in the cron tab. Okay. So what I'll do, I'll try my best before that process gets root permissions. I will try to inject it with my malicious code. I will try to inject it with my malicious code. Or I can do something like this, that when that process is running as a cron tab, it should actually open a gateway and that gateway should send information to me on a particular IP address so that I know what is happening, what kind of sensitive files did it get access to. Okay, I can do that as well. I can do that. Okay, what will I do? I will inject that process with malicious code. I will try to add some piece of code there, or I can use a pre-written exploit and put it there in the process. And then when that process gets root permission, I, as an attacker, will indirectly get information about the sensitive files on that system. That is possible, guys. Now, how? Again, in our labs, we are going to do that, but at least you should understand what is happening. So all of you, do you agree that we can indirectly do something? Indirectly doing something, saying that is an idea. Okay, is just a statement. How do we convert that statement into practice? That is what we are going to see. But did you understand this? That this is possible. This is possible. Now what we are doing as a regular user, we are making, or we are actually putting the process forward. We are using that process to indirectly cause privilege escalation. Does that make sense to you guys? We talked about privilege escalation yesterday and on Friday. So this is one more method of gaining full access to somebody's system. Now, what am I talking about? Let's see. Okay, I'm going to go here. So if I have to do, so this is basically the cron tab, guys. Okay, this is basically the cron tab. Cron tab is just going to tell me that there are going to be some jobs which are going to get fed, and these jobs are going to get run automatically. Okay, now it tells me this is for minute, this is for hour, this is for day of the month, this is for month, this is for day of the week. When will it run? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So everything is attached here, all the numbers. When is the month? So if the month is anywhere between 1 to 12, we will be able to see when this process runs. Okay, so again, it has a further bifurcation. Cron hourly, this is for the processes which are going to run every hour. This is for the processes which are going to run every day. This is for the processes which are going to run every week. This is for the processes which are going to run every month. So this is what can happen. Okay. So this is the cron tab, a very important file for us. Whether you are a blue teamer who is investigating a specific case, or you are a red teamer who is an ethical hacker who is trying to gain access into your client's system. Okay, so this is cron tab. Understood, everyone? What is cron tab? What does it do? So if from a Linux perspective, you are asked this question, what is a cron tab? You just simply have to say that cron tab is basically a file in Linux which maintains a list of processes which are supposed to run in automated or in a recurring manner. Okay. Coming to the next file. etc hosts. It's a simple file. Let me ask you this question. Do you remember, do you guys know what is the IP address for ksrconsultantservices.com? Do you guys know that? Well, obviously you can find that out using Google or by whois.com or by any other tool, but you guys remember by heart what is the IP address of ksrconsultantservices.com? Yes or no?
Yes, we can able to find that.
But do you remember that by heart already?
No.
No, right? So for the websites, we can't really, remember each and every IP. That's not possible. Okay. And since this was a huge problem when the internet was created, so for that a protocol was created named domain name service, popularly known as the DNS protocol. So the DNS protocol just does this. It will take a URL or a host name and map it to its particular address. It's IP. It's that simple. Okay, it is that simple. A host name to an IP mapping. Okay, so in Linux, where are such mappings kept? These mappings are kept inside the host files, the hosts files. Because I just downloaded a latest version of Kali Linux before we started our classes, so I don't have any mappings here. Now in our labs, when we have to when we have to connect to a victim server, when we have to hack into a server, then sometimes if I don't remember its IP, I will just add a name for that. Okay, I will add a name for that. So this is where you can either add names for those IPs, or if in a case you are hacking somebody's machine and you are able to get access to their etc hosts files, then what you can do is that you can redirect the traffic to your own machine. You can also do that by changing the settings inside this. Okay, so after I'm done with Linux fundamentals, I'm going to talk about networking. Okay, so this is an IPv4 address, the address that we commonly use. This one is a IPv6 address. Okay, just to let you know, but we have this section as well after I'm done with Linux fundamentals. Okay, so this is what you can do in host files. Now, other than this, there are a lot many files in etc as well. But to be very honest, from a cybersecurity perspective, this is all we need to know. And if we come across any file during our labs or during our advanced classes, then I'll first explain the whole theory behind it. Okay, I'll explain the whole theory behind it, so you don't have to worry at all. What did I do? Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to GUI. I'm going to open the folder. I'm going to go back to computer. Okay, we looked at etc. Now look at home. We are going to look at home. So what is inside home? Now inside home, there is another folder called Kali. Okay, now what could happen is that there will be other users as well. What I'm trying to tell you is that right now on this particular system, there are only two users, root, which is automatically going to be there, and Kali, which is me. So I did not change the username. Now, if I create a new user, he will also have a home directory. Let's suppose we create a directory called Dishant. I hope I'm writing your name correctly, Dishant. This is the spelling, right? Okay. So if I create a new user Dishant, he will also have a directory or a folder which will stay here inside home. So home directory is going to basically house or is going to basically host different users and their files and respective folders. So right now, since there is only one user named Kali, you will only find one folder. So let's open this folder up in order to see what is there. So I will open up Kali, and now in Kali, there were a few, or a predefined list of directories that are already there. Okay, a lot of guys tell me we can't use Linux. Linux is not user friendly. Linux is, even Linux gives you access to such files or folders, documents where you can save your documents. You have your desktop. Okay, you have your desktop. You have your downloads directory. You can save music. You can store public. Oh, sorry, you can store pictures. And if you are sharing, or if there are multiple users on the system, then you can put those files in the public directory so that other users can also see that. You have templates and you have videos. So never say that Linux is not user friendly. I have an old computer around 10 to 12 years old. I use that for gaming. It's Linux, but I use it to play PSP games. I actually put an emulator on it. I have a PS2 emulator on it as well. I have a PS1 emulator on it as well. So I use it for playing games. I actually use it for bug bounty hunting, but most of the times when I'm not bug bounty hunting, I play games on it. Okay. Or if I want to listen to music, I have Spotify on it as well. Okay. So there is a lot that you can do with Linux. It's just that you need to get the hang of it. And all these files that you are seeing here, so these are basically from a few labs that I've solved yesterday. So Bounty Hacker, QTPNG. So these are just some files and folders that I created maybe yesterday or day before yesterday on Sunday. Okay. So every user will have access to these set of folders where they can keep their documents, they can download stuff, they can listen to music, keep their music files. They will have a public folder through which they can share files with other users living inside the home directory. Okay, so there is a lot that you can do there. Before I go to the next, directory, we'll take some time off from the directories and look at a few basic commands. What if I have to create a new file? What if I have to create a new file? I can create a new file from here. Okay. I can create a folder. I can create a document from here. It's that simple. If I have to create a folder called KSR, a folder will be created. Okay. If I have to create an empty file called Dishant, it will be created. It's that simple. You can do the same from Windows, you can do the same from Mac, you can do the same from Linux. But the challenge comes when you have to do the same thing from your terminal. Okay, this is where the challenge is. So if you have to create a new file, an empty file, you have to write one command. That's it. Can you guys tell me what that command would be? If you guys know about it. If you don't know, don't worry. You don't have to, think a lot. I'll tell you about it.
It's a file means we need to go for a VI.
So VI is basically for editing. So if you give an empty file name, then you can create it with VI as well. Okay. So VI is basically a text editor. But what if you're only told to create an empty file? What will you do at that time?
Touch.
Touch. Awesome. So I'll create touch Abdul. Okay. So do we have Abdul with us today? We have Abdul with us today. I don't think so, or maybe he is. I'm unable to see him. Okay, so I'll take Suresh and Prasad because I can see them right now with me. Uday is also here today. Okay, let's come back. Okay, so if I do touch Abdul or if I do touch Uday, two files will be created. Let's see where they are. Now they are created inside which directory? I will check that by writing pwd. They are created inside /home/Kali. If I do ls, then I will have Uday and I will have Abdul with me. Okay, so it's a simple command with which you can create files. Now basically these files are empty. Now you said vi. Well, you can use any text editor to fill these files up. Okay, so if I have to add content to Abdul and Uday, I can use any text editor. You have got Nano, you have got Mousepad, you have got Vim, you have got Vi. Okay, so it's just a matter of adaptivity. Now, when I started working on Linux, I actually started working on a text editor called Vim. Okay, I started working on Vim. Now you guys can work on any text editor of your choice. My favorite is Vim. Okay, it starts with Vim. Okay, Vim, and then if I have to add something in Abdul, this file named Abdul, I'll write Vim space Abdul and I'll get a text editor, a very weird looking text editor. Okay, now this text editor works in one certain manner. If you have to add files, if you have to add content in this files, then you will have to write I. When I pressed I, you can see that on the bottom left section, I have insert written over here. So now when I am in insert mode, I can do anything. So I can write, hi, my name. Hi, my name is Abdul. Today is the fourth class of data heist. Okay, now that's it. That's what I want to do. I've run it. I've actually added as much content as I wanted to. So I want to save it and I want to exit out of my Vim text editor. Right now it's in insert mode. To go back and to save it, I will have to write Control C. I add Control C and you can see that in the bottom section that insert mode has disappeared. Now in order to save it, I have to write this pattern :WQ exclamation. Okay. So what does this pattern, indicate? W means write, Q means quit, write and quit. So this is going to save the file. Okay. So now if I have to open and check what is inside Abdul, if I have to read the contents, which command am I going to use, guys? Which command will I use to read the contents of Abdul? CD is for changing directories.
I think for cat.
Cat. Awesome. So we write cat Abdul. So hi, my name is Abdul. Today is the fourth class of data heist. Okay, guys. So this is what you do with touch and Vim. Okay, touch creates a file, Vim edits a file, cat reads a file. Okay. Now this was for a file. What if I want to make a directory? If I have to make a directory, I will use a command called mk, make dir, mkdir, make directory space directory name. So directory name could be Prasad. Okay, mkdir Prasad. If I do ls, then you will see that Prasad will appear in blue here. So blue color usually represents what? Blue color usually represents your directory. Okay, so when we open our terminal and we see different types of colors, okay, they actually represent something. Okay, They represent stuff. So like blue is usually directories, green is basically a file. Okay, and that's how it is. Okay, we'll talk about this as well in detail. So these were some of the commands. Okay, so now how do you create a directory, guys?
mkdir.
How do you create a file?
Touch.
Okay, how do you edit a file?
Vim.
Okay, so is Vim the only text editor that is there, or do we have others as well?
Yes, we have others.
And it completely depends on, you know, your choice. Like I have been working with Vim, so I like Vim. Now you might not like Vim because you might like other editors, so I can't really force any one of you to work with Vim. I like Vim because I have been working with it, right? So it's just a matter of getting adapted to a particular tool. Okay, you have Nano, you have VI, you have Mousepad. So this is Mousepad. Just like we have Notepad, we have Mousepad here. Okay, simple tools. Okay, now if I have to open a file and I have to read it, what will I use?
The cat.
Cat. Awesome, guys.
Cat.
Yeah, thank you. And now let's go to the other directories. Okay, so back to file system. Yeah, sure. Tell me. Yeah, Dishant.
Yeah, actually, there is another command like echo, right?
Yeah,
Echo.
echo. What does, okay, so let me ask you this. When you are standing near a mountain and you echo something, what happens? When you say something loudly, it gets echoed, right? It gets repeated back to you, right?
Correct.
So same in Linux as well. So you come back here. I'm going to write echo. Are you guys able to see my screen, what I'm writing? If not, I'm going to show you one more command. You don't want to see all this clutter. You write clear. Nothing gets deleted. It's just that your terminal is now clear. So if I write echo Dishant, so what will happen here? Dishant will be repeated. Now the thing is that echo is a very basic command. Like, why do we use it then? So we use echo when we have to create, shortcuts, or when we have to create a file and put those contents in a file. So now I'll do one thing just through one command. What I'll do, look at it. I will echo some contents and I will put it into a file. Okay, how will I do that? I will write echo. I will write Abdul, and I will use this greater than sign. Now, what does this greater than sign represent? Greater than sign represents direct. It means direct. Echo Abdul. Abdul gets displayed on my screen and then it gets directed. Directed means gets sent somewhere. Where does it get sent? Uday. Now what happened here is that if I had to, edit Uday and write something inside it, it would usually take two steps. First, I would have to create a file called Uday, which I already did. Then I would have to go to Vim. And then after going to Vim, I had to go into insert mode, write Abdul. And after that, I would have to save it. Okay. Now what I did here is I echoed Abdul. So Abdul got displayed and it got directed into Uday. Now, if I do cat Uday, you will see that Abdul is present here. So basically, if you just use echo, for not doing anything else, echo seems like a useless command. But echo will help you out when you are, trying to create shortcuts, when you're trying to get the job done of 5 or 6 commands through just one command. Okay, that is when echo will help you out. Got it, Jishan? Is it clear?
And one more thing, like while with the echo we can create a doc.txt files as well, right? With the echo command.
With what kind of files?
Like .txt files or win files.
Yeah. So basically, the files that you actually create are similar to txt files, but you can basically give the extension here as well. So I can write echo space Abdul and then uday.txt. It will get directed into uday.txt. Okay.
Okay. Got it.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So now let's go ahead and look at other directories. Okay. After home comes lib. Okay. But with lib, you have lib32, lib64, libx32. Okay. So what are these? Now lib is basically short for libraries. Okay. Now we've got system libraries. We've got language libraries. Okay. Now, what do these libraries help us in doing? So if we are writing a program or if we are using a tool, then it could be making use of libraries. Okay. Now libraries are going to be sets of code. They are going to be used whenever we have to invoke something or we have to compile our source code or whenever we have to create a program that is going to be a running executable. Okay. So what is going to get used in that case is this lib directory. Okay. Now suppose you are writing a Python program. Okay. So there are set of Python libraries as well. So where are they present? Inside lib directory. Okay. So just like when we have our programs on Windows, we use something which is known as DLL, dynamic link libraries. Okay. So these are used for running our programs, running our executables. If we take a very simple example, you are writing a C program and you are making use of conio.h, you are making use of stdio.h. So what are these? These are basically libraries. Okay. So for programs where we get our predefined functions, where we get our predefined classes, that's through libraries. So where are those libraries present inside Linux? They are present inside lib. Now, why do we have lib32 and lib64? Because of the 32-bit and 64-bit. So our device could be a 32-bit system, our device could be a 64-bit system. So those libraries have been categorized. So that those libraries have been categorized according to the processor architecture. So your processor could be a 32-bit processor, your processor could be a 64-bit processor. So accordingly, your files are kept there. Okay. Again, from a cybersecurity perspective, no need. But when we have to write our own scripts, I'll show you like which library we have to use. Okay. That is it about the lib. Okay. Now coming to media. Wait a second. I will use the pen again. Okay. I will come to media. Now any removable drive that you add or any flash drive that you add. So if you add a DVD here or if you add a USB here, you will see that in media. Okay. For backups, you will have MNT. This is for backups. OPT means optional packages that you can have on your operating system. Again, not going into detail. Why? Because this is not as necessary as it is for us. Okay. If you are making use of virtualization, okay, then your virtual memory will be here. Okay. Again, not going into detail because no direct help for us in cybersecurity. Okay. Then comes root directory. What is going to be there inside root directory, guys? See, and I don't have the permissions to access it directly. What is going to be inside the root directory, guys?
So bin etc. Sorry.
List of user information or
Uh,
sensitive files.
yeah, so basically to make it very easy, what is this, guys? Let me show you. So you have multiple users on your operating system, right? And right now I have just two users. One is root and one is Kali. Just like Kali has his home directory where he can keep his documents, where he can keep his downloads, where he can keep his pictures, videos, etc. A root user is also allowed to do that. Okay, a root user can also do that. So basically, Kali's home directory was inside a directory named /home/Kali. Root also has a home directory, but his home directory is not kept inside home. Why? Because the files for root are going to be sensitive. So if you keep them with home, then it's highly likely that, you know, the boundaries of access control can collapse and files can be seen from Kali to root. So that is why his home directory is kept separate from other users. Okay, it's like quarters, it's like government quarters. So like the person with the highest position will be given a quarter away from other workers, right? Similarly, that's for the root user. So that is what happens. Understood, guys? So the root user will also have documents, downloads, pictures, his own files, but for security purposes, for the purposes of access control and for the purposes of maintaining least privileges, you keep root's home directory separately. Okay. Now a lot of people get confused. You know, if you get some questions like this in the exam or in the interview, what is the difference between this and this? Okay. So this directory is the ultimate home directory or the ultimate parent directory, commonly referred to as root directory. This directory is known as root users home directory. What is the difference and why do people get confused? Now this directory is for a particular user or the super user named root. This directory is basically the root from which all the branches go. Okay, that is why it is known as root directory. So that is why, well, this is not actually a name. This is no name at all. Ultimate parent directory. I use it so that people can understand it in a better way. Okay, so that you know that when slash starts, this is where all the directories will be. So just like a tree has a root from which, you know, you will have different branches. Similarly, this is where everything will be. So from here you will have bin, from here you will have etc, from here you will have home, from here you will have lib. Okay, so that is what the slash is. Understood, guys?
Yeah. So Adira, see, we are using the sudo, right? Then where it is going? It is going to the slash or to the root.
Root, it is going to the root, it is not going to the slash.
Okay.
Okay, it is going to the root because root is a user. Here slash is just going to represent this. Okay, slash, whenever slash gets mentioned, consider it as a tree's root. Consider it as a tree's root. But when slash root gets mentioned, or whenever you hear the word sudo, or whenever you hear the word super user, you have to bring this in mind. Got it?
Yeah. Fine.
Okay. So again, so these are the, you know, naming conventions created by the Linux developers. Okay, I didn't do this. If I developed Linux, then I would definitely give a different name to slash because it is very, very, very confusing. Okay, it is very, very confusing. Now you have other directories as well. So when you are running applications, okay, whenever you are running applications, so then they will have some process IDs, or if those applications are connected to the internet, then they will work on something known as sockets. I will talk about sockets when I talk about the networking portion tomorrow. So these are kept inside a directory called a run. Okay. Then there are some other binaries as well. I told you that you have most of the binaries here, but then we have some types of binaries which are known as administrative binaries. Okay, which are used for maintaining your operating system. So these are known as administrative binaries. So just like you have bin, you have sbin. Okay, sbin contains the administrative commands like mount a file system, shut down your computer. Okay, very similar to bin, but these files or binaries are kept inside sbin. That's it. Okay. Then if you are going online, if you're trying to connect to a download server, or if you're trying to connect to a website, so for the websites that run and make use of networking, they are present inside SRV. Again, no need to remember all this. No need to remember all this. Okay. Then you will have sys. Okay. Your device info, your kernel info. Kernel is basically a part of your device which makes the interaction between operating system and the hardware possible. Okay, all of that is present inside sys. Okay, when your computer boots up, some files are required there, some temporary files must be required. So those temporary files which are used for making your system run smoothly are kept inside temp directory or the temporary directory. Okay, now comes the directory which I really like as a pen tester or as an ethical hacker, which is the USR directory. The USR directory basically is going to contain, a lot of additional tools and a lot of, sub tools for specific type of programs that are installed on the operating system. And the USR directory will vary for each type of Linux distribution. Like for Ubuntu, it will be different. For Kali Linux, it will be different. How? Now here guys, if I open this up, you can see all the programs that I have already on my operating system. So Kali Linux being used for hacking or for cybersecurity purposes, the most of the tools that you're going to see here are for cybersecurity. So for web application analysis, you have a web proxy, you have a tool here, you have SQL map for finding out vulnerabilities related to SQL databases. If you are using WordPress, then how do you find out vulnerabilities in WordPress? For that, you have a tool. Okay, if you have to analyze problems in databases, you can again use SQL map. If you are trying to crack somebody's passwords, then you can use tools like Hashcat, John, Medusa. Okay. If you're trying to carry out attacks on somebody's Bluetooth, or if you're trying to carry out attacks on somebody's Wi-Fi network, then you have tools like Aircrack, Kismet, Reaver, Wi-Fi. Okay. If you're trying to open up executable files, so suppose if you want to create cheat codes for a file for a game, if you want to open up a game binary and want to see what are the different types of ways through which you can bypass a specific level in the game, so you have reverse engineering tools as well. Okay, you have exploitation tools as well, you have sniffing tools as well, you have spoofing tools as well. Now all these tools have some metadata, have some binaries, have some word lists associated with them. Okay, so all those packages are stored inside USR directory. Yeah, you had a question, guys. Tell me. Any questions, Dishant?
No, nothing from my end.
Okay, so basically all that we have, according to the operating system, according to the Linux operating system we are using, it will be kept inside USR directory. Now, this USR directory will contain different types of, it will contain different types of tools, okay, which are useful for me as a pen tester, okay, which are useful to me as a pen tester. Now, this will differ for a person using Ubuntu, because there you will have tools for deploying servers. There you will have tools for deploying web services. Okay, so it will differ. So whatever is there inside USR directory, because it is a very important directory, we have to take a look. We have to actually understand it deeply from a cybersecurity perspective, because whenever we have to launch tools, we need to know if there are any word lists. I'll talk about word lists as well. So all this will be discussed tomorrow. But if you guys have any doubts related to today's session, you tell me.
Hi, Adrit. Is it any chance to hack this our this SAR
What this
for the Windows
for
for the
Windows?
whatever password shared in SAR, right? Security SMR, security master,
Sam.
security
Yes,
access, right?
Sam. Right.
Yeah, Sam. Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
is it any chance to hack this Sam?
Yeah. So basically you can do a lot. So there is not just one way for that. You have multiple ways. You can use tools like Mimikatz. Okay. You can use the process of credential dumping. Okay. What happens is, when processes automatically crash, sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
happens, right? Processes automatically crash. So what happens is that a crash report is generated. Okay. And inside this crash report, you will also have information related to your RAM. Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, when a crash report is generated, you can go inside processes, you can inject them, and through which you can finally get access into the SAM database. So basically, in Windows, the types of hashes that you have are NT and LM. And using these tools like Mimikatz or Cobalt Strike, you can easily gain access into SAM. Easily. Hacking a Windows machine is way easier than hacking into a Linux machine.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So you have tools like this. So when I'm done with Linux hacking, then I'm going to have a similar class regarding Windows, where we will not be looking at Windows from a regular user perspective, like this is Microsoft Documents, this is that, this is Control Panel. No, we have to launch Process Explorer, we have to launch Process Hacker, we have to launch sysinternal suite and see what kind of processes work. So when a computer start, which process opens up first? Okay, what if you're trying to gain access into the RAM's state? Okay, how do you preserve a RAM state? Okay, even if the computer is turned off. For that you have different types of attacks. Like, just giving an example, that RAM is a volatile memory, right? As soon as you switch your computer off, it is impossible to gain the state of RAM, it is impossible to access the state of RAM. But what happened that in 2018, guys, in 2018, an attack was discovered. And what does that attack say? The name of the attack is cold boot attack. Okay. So they said that as when the computer is turned off, as soon as it is turned off, use a cooling spray. So there are different types of cooling sprays. One cooling spray can actually cool it up to minus 45 degrees Celsius. Minus 45 degrees Celsius, it is possible. Okay. If you cool your RAM to minus 45 degrees Celsius, it was found out that its session can be, or its state can be preserved. So once you cool it and then you put it into any other system, you will see that whatever was active on that particular RAM, you can be able to access it again. That is possible. You guys must be thinking that I am just bluffing. You can actually Google cold boot attack after the end of this class. That is possible, guys. Okay. So basically, there are a lot of ways through which you can hack into machines. Some of them require extensive knowledge of the operating system. Some of the attacks require extensive knowledge of the hardware. So if you think that a person who is, a pro hacker can do each and everything, that is just not possible, because every day new vulnerabilities are coming up, and you can't really, cope up with so many vulnerabilities. So what people do is initially they try to study each and everything, and once they find their passion, they stick to one. Okay, like a person could be a full-time hardware security researcher or a hardware hacker, through which they will eventually gain access into the system, but using hardware attacks. Okay, Chetan?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, guys. So that's all for today. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we are going to meet tomorrow. We are going to finish up the Linux file system, and then tomorrow we are also going to take a look at the basic networking terms. How can OSI model help us out? How can ports help us out? What is an IP address? What is a MAC address? I'm assuming that most of you know about this, but for those of you who don't know about it, it will be a nice lesson. And on Thursday, we are going to hack our first machine with the knowledge that we have acquired so far. Okay. So hacking, the actual hacking starts from Thursday, where we will hack into a machine with whatever we know right now. Okay. So I'll ask you each and everything. What is in the root directory? What is in the home directory? Okay. So before we leave, guys, what is a cron? What is a cron? Before I end the session, what is a cron?
It's Linux processor based module or portal.
Process scheduler, right? Linux process scheduler,
Uh,
right?
yeah, automated process recurring manner.
Yes, yes, Suresh, right. Okay. And how do I create a directory, guys?
MKDR.
MKDIR.
Right. And what if I have to clear whatever was on my screen? I have to start from a fresh terminal. Which command?
Clear.
Simple. Okay. So now you know the very basic commands. pwd echo. What does echo do? What does echo do?
Yeah, it is directed to another file or direct
Okay, so the very basic
another.
use of echo is just it will repeat whatever you wrote. Okay, but you can put or you can direct whatever is after echo into other files. Okay. Okay, guys.
Yes.
Okay, so do one thing. Try to watch the videos because on Thursday when we hack our machine, I am going to ask you a lot of questions. I will not start from the basics, because these from Friday when we started, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, we have been talking about the very basics of Linux. So I want you guys to answer those questions on that day. So if I ask you that how can I find a process which might be automated, so at that time I expect an answer like this, that hey, the you can go to etc directory. Inside etc directory there will be a folder called or there will be a file called cron tab. So there you can look at processes which run hourly, weekly, monthly, and daily. Okay, so you have to help me out in that case. Okay, guys, so thanks for attending the session. Thanks for being interactive. I like that a lot when you guys are interactive, you guys are asking questions. Okay.
One question, Adira. Can we get
Yes,
any
sir.
documents instead of checking every time recorded sessions?
So yeah, basically, we haven't actually started with our practical portion till now. We have only been discussing theory. So when we start with, the practicals, inside that, I have actually sent the KSR team a small document. Now, inside that document, there are not a lot of, concepts, but there are links. There are links like for the homework,
Yes.
like if you have to go through Linux fundamentals. So if as soon as you click here, you will get directed to a website which is Try Hack Me. Okay. So on that website, you will be able to, even if you don't have Linux installed on your operating system, you can still go through browser-based labs. That is what is good about such a platform. So everything is there which we have discussed. Linux fundamentals part 1, part 2, and part 3. So here you will come across basic commands, background of Linux, searching for files, okay, using grep, shell operators, conclusion, fundamentals part 2, everything. Okay, I've already shared it with the KSR team. You can just contact them, Praveen, and they will provide you this file. Okay.